This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the best all-in-one platform for any of your website building and hosting needs. Hey guys, it's Celestia, and today we're going to be talking about art hacks, a topic that probably doesn't even warrant an introduction at this point, given that it's impossible to exist within the art side of YouTube without drowning in videos dedicated to trying out TikTok's newest, greatest ones. Also, sorry in advance about my voice, I'm sick, but I still have to record, so here we are. Anyway, art hacks and shortcuts have established a massive presence on short-form content platforms like TikTok and YouTube Shorts, largely because quick, simple tips that don't require a lot of explanation are very well suited to short-form content and the attention spans of those who consume it. For better or worse, it's hard to ignore that art hacks have become a significant, sometimes beloved, sometimes hated, fixture within the art community, with some spreading genuinely helpful advice and others effectively serving as the spiritual successors to those dumb one-image tutorials on Pinterest where one side is wrong and the other is right with no further context. These art hacks and shortcuts have the potential to be either helpful or harmful, depending on their context and the circumstances in which they're applied. And as a result, I wanted to take today's video to explain, at least in my opinion, the difference between helpful art hacks and harmful ones. But first, let me take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace, as anyone who watches my channel regularly probably knows, is an all-in-one website building and hosting platform that I've been using since long before I started working with them, primarily for my art studio website and my personal portfolio. They have even more templates than they did when I built those now, and I have a new one picked out already to redesign my studio site with once I finish the landing page illustrations. And I'm honestly so excited to get started with it because Squarespace actually makes web design fun. Because it's not just the templates that are so versatile and impressive, it's also the fact that you can edit them using Fluid Engine, a next-generation website design system that lets you customize every aspect of your site with a smooth, easy-to-use drag-and-drop system. Using it, you can pretty much do anything. Turn your site into an online store, create members-only spaces to keep exclusive content behind a paywall, and so much more. It doesn't matter what you need your site to do. Whether you want a beautiful portfolio or a place to sell your art, you can make it on Squarespace. And you can get a free trial to test it out yourself right now by going to squarespace.com/DuchessCelestia, linked in the description, and use code DuchessCelestia for 10% off your first domain purchase. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video, and please go check them out. Now, back to the art hacks. Obviously, they're popular for a reason. They speed up the creative process, simplify complex techniques, and make them much more easy to integrate into your work, and spread awareness about digital art software tricks that could make your drawing experience a lot easier. Yes, I'm obviously here to be critical of their downsides, but I'm not going to deny that a lot of them actually are helpful. In fact, half of the video is going to be talking about how they are. I'm not always a downer, I swear, just the vast majority of the time because the world is garbage. Anyway, while I fully acknowledge that in a lot of cases art hacks can be great, I also have to acknowledge that in other cases they're not. Some are full of oversimplification and under-explanation of art concepts that require much more elaboration than they receive to be accurately understood, advice that only applies in certain circumstances being spread as universal art rules, and inaccurate misinformation being shared by beginner artists that aren't skilled enough to be making tutorials or quote-unquote hacks in the first place. There are two sides to the coin that is art hacks, and knowing both is important to be able to discern when and how to incorporate them into your work. So in today's video, we'll be going over both the helpful and harmful sides of them. Let's start with the helpful because people usually want the good news before the bad news, I think. I mean, I don't, but I'm the kind of person who dips cucumbers in mustard and calls reading manga on my kitchen counter with my cat book club, so I don't think I represent an average human being. Whatever. So what makes art hacks helpful? First and most obviously, they speed up the creative process. I get that a lot of us want to draw out the process of drawing as long as we can so that we can actually enjoy the time we spend doing it and get the most value out of it as we can. But for those of us who either do art professionally or strive to gain an online following from it, that's just not feasible. Industry artists are constantly constrained by tight deadlines and incentivized to work as quickly as humanly possible, and even independent freelance artists are pushed by social media algorithms to be posting finished pieces as frequently as they can in order to have a chance at actually having that work reach other human beings. So naturally, if a technique or shortcut offers us the ability to make our art faster and more efficiently, we're gonna want that. So it comes as no surprise that we're all very interested in potential ways to make that happen. Like get-rich-quick schemes, but for art. And to make our work better with as little effort as possible to stand out from the hordes of other artists we're effectively competing against just by sharing our work on the same platforms? Hell yeah, who doesn't want that? Any art hack that can make that happen is something almost every artist is not just open to, but desperate for. And when they genuinely are able to achieve that outcome, which many are, the value of that can't be understated. I've personally seen tons of art hacks that do exactly that, and that I've subsequently used in my own work, like drawing a bird's eye flat floor plan and then distorting it to the dimensions you want it to be in 3D, and treating that floor plan as a base to draw the furniture from. And that's just one example of many that allows artists with limited free time and the pressure to produce social media content to allocate their time more effectively, something that is invaluable to many. That's not the only plus side though. Of course it's not. There's a whole section of plus sides. Why am I right? I'm tired, okay? Scripting is hard. If you had told high school me I would make writing essays once a week my job, I would have laughed myself into an asthma attack. Anyway, another art hack win is that they tend to make complex, somewhat difficult to understand artistic concepts more digestible. Art is full of intricate rendering techniques, specific and sometimes difficult to interpret shapes that make up human anatomy, composition rules that define whether a piece is dynamic and interesting or boring and flat, and a million other complex processes required to make art good. For beginners or amateurs, that can be incredibly daunting. It can make learning to draw or improve your existing art skills seem impossible. Hell, I've been drawing for a decade and I still find it daunting. If an art hack can simplify those techniques and concepts into something that an artist feels they can actually achieve, that's valuable. Drawing a hand from scratch can seem intimidating and difficult to a beginner, but an art hack that breaks down doing so into simple steps like identifying and drawing the hand's basic shapes before refining it into a finalized, cleaned up version might make it seem more possible. In this way, art hacks kind of demystify art for people who might want to start learning how to draw but were previously intimidated by how much there is to learn. These hacks may very well be the bridge between would-be artists that were too overwhelmed to start learning and beginner artists finding simple tools with which to start learning because they make it more accessible. But that's just the actual drawing technique side of things. Art hacks are also helpful because they share and popularize incredibly useful shortcuts found in mainstream digital art software. I learned so many Procreate tips from TikTok art hacks, like faster color filling, isolating line art layers when you accidentally merge them, gesture controls, and emulating a stroke or outline feature by using Gaussian blur and automatic selection tools, all of which I would have been completely unaware of if it weren't for those videos, because Procreate itself doesn't explain those tools to any significant degree, just like most digital art programs. There are a million tools in each program that can be utilized a million different ways to improve and expedite the way you make art, and short-form art hack content is particularly well suited to delivering that information. In 30 seconds or less, you can explain how to use the multiply, overlay, or luminosity layer mode fairly succinctly. Similarly, in another 30-second video, you could explain clipping masks and alpha lock. It's because these tools aren't complex or difficult enough to understand that they require more time to explain. They're simple and easy to use, it's just that many artists don't know that they exist or how to make use of them. That means they're perfect for short-form content where you don't have long to explain how they work. There's not much to explain about how they work, and nothing significant will be left out by simplifying their features. These software-based art hacks might be my favorites of all because they're making digital art more accessible without sacrificing nuance or important context. They're communicating all of the necessary information to make full use of the tips they're conveying, because the tips themselves aren't complicated so much as they're just not well known. The same can be said about traditional art hacks. The majority of them aren't based in technique, but rather tools. For example, a really cool one I found and used on TikTok was an art hack about how Mr. Clean magic erasers could be used to erase dried paint mistakes on canvases and thick watercolor paper, which I've since used a lot. There was another one about using saran wrap on top of your paint palette so that your lazy ass, or mine in this case, can just peel it off after you're done painting and avoid having to clean it, which saved so much time. There are a million household supplies that these art hacks can teach you to use to fix your mistakes, streamline your creative process, save money on expensive art supplies with, and so on. And they're all easily communicated in short-form video content, so they're perfectly suited to be presented as art hacks. They're not teaching you how to draw, which is something that requires a more nuanced explanation. They're teaching you how to draw what you already know how to draw more easily with simpler techniques or tools, whether physical or digital. But not everything can fit into 30 seconds. As I'm sure you've gathered by my implications so far, art techniques are not, in my opinion, well suited to the same form of quick, easily consumed content, because they are a lot more complex. You can't explain anatomy in 30 seconds for an art hack in the same way you can explain how to use an overlay layer to brighten your art's colors, because one is simply significantly more complicated than the other, and that leads to the harmful side of art hacks. Despite the good they can do in some instances, art hacks are restricted, for the most part, by the strict time limits imposed by the platforms they're posted on, by which I naturally mean TikTok and a side of YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels. We've already established that in some cases, art hacks can be empowered by that time limit because they don't need more than that to explain their concepts, and therefore benefit from being able to be promoted to audiences more inclined to pay attention for limited amounts of time. Others, though, require much more explanation than can be included within that time frame, and genuinely suffer from the fact that that time and context can't be given. And that brings us to the dark side of art hacks, how they can be more harmful than helpful. As I said, the biggest problem art hacks present is the oversimplification explanation of the concepts being taught. Obviously, an art hack has to be simple, otherwise it's not an art hack, it's just an art technique. And them being simple is, as discussed, a benefit sometimes too, because it makes difficult techniques or subject matter more accessible and less daunting to artists of all skill levels. But to be blunt, some things just shouldn't be simplified. Some techniques can't effectively be broken down to just 1 or 2 points, and need to actually be studied, thoroughly explained, and practiced. But with such little time to explain the concepts, and the whole point being that the hacks aren't complicated, complex artistic techniques are often not explained comprehensively. So viewers might learn that a particular hack works, but they aren't taught how or why it works. And this lack of understanding limits their ability to apply the hack to different artistic situations beyond the specific instance demonstrated in the video. For example, there's a popular art hack on TikTok right now called the pizza overlay, where you airbrush a big red circle over your character's face, then a smaller yellow or orange circle on the middle of that one, and then set the layer to overlay or soft light depending on the video. The result is that the character's face ends up looking brighter, more saturated, and just overall better in most cases. And yes, that's a cool way to teach artists how to brighten their characters' faces, but it doesn't teach them how the hack achieved that effect. If it had explained that overlaying more saturated versions of individual colors used in the piece with specific layer types can brighten them and give them more depth, or that even overlaying the quote-unquote pizza over the whole piece could be used to set the tone and atmosphere of the piece by bringing all the colors together, they could have learned a much more versatile and more widely applicable technique. Instead, their application of the technique will be indefinitely limited to the character's face. Like, yes, the hack did teach them a useful way to brighten it, but neglected to teach them why it was effective, even when knowing why it was effective would have helped them learn to use it to its fullest extent. But oversimplification doesn't just result in art hacks not teaching artists how to use them enough. In other cases, it teaches them to use them too much. What I'm referring to is art hacks that do work, but only work in specific circumstances. Even so, they're shared and popularized as if they're universal rules that always work. Like this hack about drawing your characters with a curved line of action. Like, yes, that works if you're drawing a character in movement, but what about a character that isn't? What, you're not allowed to draw a character standing still ever? Obviously, more dynamic poses with more movement are more visually appealing, but that doesn't mean that using more curved lines of action is always necessary or applicable. The infamous quote-unquote art rule of side profiles that's been the topic of much discussion as of late is, regardless of the wider controversy surrounding it, another example of this. Yes, some side profiles do look like that and can benefit from this hack. Others don't, and using the hack anyway would result in a blatantly incorrect, inaccurate outcome. These hacks being treated as universal rules, either by openly claiming them to be or just by failing to explain that they're not, is incredibly misleading to beginners who lack the knowledge and experience to understand when or why to use them, resulting in them using them indiscriminately in all situations, even when doing so is categorically wrong. Other art hacks do the same by failing to explain that they only work in one style and won't work in others, like this hack for facial proportions or this one for exaggerating all body proportions. Yes, within that style, the hack is applicable, but many fail to acknowledge that when applied to other styles, it might actually make it worse. A lot of this comes down to another significant underlying problem with art hacks, that many of them are made by beginners who quite simply don't have the knowledge or skill to be giving art advice. So many art hacks are clearly made and shared by amateurs who don't have a strong enough grasp on the fundamentals to be simplifying them, because anyone can make an art hack and post it regardless of their own level of experience. And based on the nature of social media, the validity of art hacks is determined by public reception and not actual accuracy. A hack is judged by how many likes it gets, not how technically correct it is. As a result, beginner-made art hacks that are just blatantly incorrect are spread on a massive scale to other beginners who don't realize that they're wrong, and that's obviously a problem. Finally, I'd also like to take a moment to address the problem with how art hacks are being used. Not on a technical level, as we've already gone over, but more on a conscious level, how the artists using them actually view them. What I mean is that there's a very significant difference between using an art hack as a shortcut to make a technique you already knew how to use faster, and using an art hack as a skill substitute and a way to avoid needing to learn that technique at all. There are a lot of really good art hacks that help you use layer modes to improve the color in your art, and you can absolutely use them in addition to actual knowledge of color theory to save time and draw faster. But you could also use them instead of bothering to study color theory at all, because you don't need to if you just use the hacks. As a result, art hacks as a whole walk a fine line between helpful shortcuts and substitutes for skill. And while their effectiveness is at least somewhat dependent on having some degree of skill, that's not always enough to motivate artists to not use them as crutches instead. It's tempting to do less work than you have to, I get that, and studying art can be a lot of work, but unless you're a hobbyist with no interest in legitimately improving, it's important not to use art hacks as a replacement for education. While shortcuts are legitimately valuable, it's even more valuable to learn the underlying techniques that they're simplifying. Ultimately, I don't mean to bash art hacks as a whole or tell you not to use them. They've existed since Bob Ross for a reason, and that's because many of them actually are helpful. But they're also a double-edged sword, capable of being both helpful or harmful to artists depending on their content and how they're used. They're popular because a lot of them work, and so long as the artists viewing and using them are fact-checking them, learning why they work, and using them as supplementary tools rather than sole methods of artistic development, there's nothing wrong with art hacks continuing to dominate the art communities of short-form video platforms. Not that we could stop them even if we wanted to. What matters is how we interact with them as viewers and artists, making sure they're actually correct, examining whether or not they're always applicable, and choosing not to use them as alternatives to actual studying and practice. The key, in my opinion, is to find a balance between using fact-checked art hacks to maximize your efficiency and still continuing to build a strong foundation of artistic knowledge and skill alongside them. And if art's just your hobby and growth and improvement aren't priorities to you, just have fun with art hacks then. They are fun. Just messing around with them to find out what works for you and what doesn't. It's a good time. Even if you end up not vibing with some of them, you might find yourself really enjoying and learning from others, because the beauty in them really comes down to the artistic experimentation that they prompt viewers to engage in. Art hacks are fun. So long as you don't take them too seriously, that's all they need to be. But what do you guys think? Do you like and use art hacks, or do you think they're becoming dangerously close to artistic misinformation framed as education? Do you have any that you really love and helped you with your art? Let me know in the comments, especially if you've got an art hack that is truly a gift from God that more artists need to see. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Special thank you as always to channel members Cafe Soleil, Joseph Solomon, TC Pratt, Zelda Deverak42, King Good James, and Haruki Kenway, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Blue Swanson, Cora Fear, Jamisha Walker, Eleng Shi, Kim Yen, Shamil Sheep, Crazy Asar, Gen Tong, Grayson Xavier, MG, Blah Mage, TC Pratt, Finn, Grim Spectre, Celine Merriman, Ash, Eldritchia, The Stray Dog, Allura, Greg Noble, Decagon, Milchio, and Jenny Chan for their support, and I'll see you in the next one.